Hello and welcome to the online training module on Learning Dreams. This training is a collaborative effort between Learning Dreams and the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. This training module is part of an online training effort that covers a wide range of topic areas in child welfare. In this module, Dr. Jerry Stein is going to talk about the history and current practice of Learning Dreams, a community-based education and learning project. Welcome to the online training series. After completing this section of the training, you should have a broad understanding of the community-centered model of education, be able to talk with young people and the adults in their lives about their personal learning dreams, and understand the power of educational advocacy for the child welfare system. Current research and practice related to these topics will be discussed, after which you should have a general knowledge base of the current research findings and modes of practice. Subsequent modules will build on this knowledge base.
Learning Dreams is about believing that learning is owned by the community, it's owned by the families. It isn't fundamentally a school-owned operation. I believe that in the original days of social work, the settlement house workers and the early social workers did not so much disentangle education and casework and social work as they become two separate fields. My read on the early days is they actually were a unified field, and people didn't hardly distinguish what they were doing when they were out working with families. And I think, in a funny way, people that know the old settlement house stuff, when they hear about Learning Dreams, they'll just say, oh, that's kind of old settlement work. And I always go, yeah. And I think actually, in many ways, this is in the fields that we're in. This is actually back there at the heart of it. It's not actually some new invention. A culture of learning is the foundation for educational success. We're not thinking about school success or reading success, all those things that are really important, that matter to us, that we believe in promoting, but we're doing it by trying to promote a deeper participation in learning as people who love to learn and want to learn and think they can learn. Culture of learning comes from social capital. It's one of the least inspiring phrases that have come out in the last 20 years or so, but it's useful because financial capital is what you need to make new investments in the economy, and then human capital was the next term. That's what, when individuals have kind of investments made in them, educational degrees and things like that are investment in this, so they call it human capital. Since we're a capitalist society, it was a way to kind of indicate how important that was. And then some of us have been wanting to talk about communities and how communities have to have kind of like experiences and histories of trust and working together and being able to do give and take, and if someone does something, they're going to get a response that kind of matches what they do, and the world kind of makes sense to them. And there's a lot of really interesting evidence that if communities don't have what has now been called social capital, there's things in the society itself that allow, then they can't get other things done. Robert Putnam studied the country of Italy, and some of you may have heard the details of this, or you may not have, but Italy in 1970, Italy's about the size of California. In 1970 it went to regional governments, so they broke it into 8 or 9 regional governments, and in about 1990, he was hired to try to figure out why some of the regions worked well and some didn't. In some regions, the garbage was picked up pretty much on time. If you called someone at a public place, the phone would get answered. The schools seemed to be working. The public services of a democracy were functioning fairly well, and in some they weren't, and they couldn't track the money, and no one was answering the phone. And he studied it in great depth and ended up arguing that, and these are exact examples, but they're also metaphors, that the regions that had things like soccer clubs and music, singing clubs, places where people associated in what he called horizontal. Regions that had political associations didn't correlate with effective functioning of democratic services, because he he felt the political organizations in Italy were organized hierarchical, and there was not this ongoing buildup of trust over year after year after year. So he began talking about the need for civic capacity to exist. Social capital is one of the terms that refers to this kind of give and take. But for our purposes, it's extremely interesting because it argued that if certain like public services are not working, if the schools aren't functioning, if democracy can't do what it's supposed to do, instead of trying to solve it, it's reasonable in his terms to say, we better start singing together, we better start having clubs, we better start eating together. We have to do things that step outside of the service model that only works when there's a certain functional level of civic trust being built in a variety of ways. So that's a really serious challenge to the ordinary way we think about services. For people from this area, if you think back to I mean, this has had a huge effect. This isn't just theory. In Minneapolis, a number of years ago, African-American Superintendent Carol Johnson and African-American Mayor Sharon Sayles Belton jointly got together to try to change and to some extent roll back historic efforts to bus kids out of the cities to get integrated education, because they bought Putnam's argument that if you were weakening the community by doing that and undermining its social capital, the attempt to work at the school level was incorrect. And so that's a huge thing, because everyone from the United States knows the amazing historic power of the need to start the busing movement to address our historic issues with racism and things like that. So when two brilliant African-American leaders in Minneapolis are arguing to question that, it's because they're essentially buying Putnam's argument directly that you have to think about strengthening the communities before you think about getting the services right. So what this just shows, simple things, state by state, as parental support goes up, social capital goes up, parental support goes up. That if the community has social capital in it, you're going to get parental support. If social capital is high in community and states, then you'll see math and science and reading scores are high. This one shows social capital goes up, dropout rates go down. And so it begins to raise this question, should you be working in wider ways than a strict institutional focus? Social capital is measuring a couple things in this particular one. It's measuring the way he's getting at how people feel trust and participation in the community. So this is measuring volunteerism. Are people volunteering in the communities? It's measuring when they volunteer, are people in the community willing to take leadership roles? It's measuring informal sociability, which is another way to saying that people eat next door fairly often. Do they hang out in the community? It's measuring that. It's measuring civic kind of participation through voting records, voting, participation, leadership, hanging out. This is another highly suggestive study by Hart and Risley. This is about number of words addressed to children. So these are generalities, by the way. There are specific professional, working class, and welfare families that don't fit into these measurements in any way. It's always good to keep that in mind. There's many of them that don't. But this shows, so by 48 months, so that's a 4-year-old, a general professional family, the kids have heard 50 million words. That's not 50 million different words, but it means there have been 50 million utterances in their home. And then this shows that the kids at the lowest income levels, on the average, when they are 4 years old, have heard 18 million words. And so some people call this the 32 million word catastrophe. This is a 3-year measure, but it shows that the kids at 3 years have 1,150 words, different words. Now those are specific vocabulary words. And down, it goes down, and then down here we got about 550 or so. So it's a huge vocabulary difference. This got done with schools. This is all long before schools ever enter into these pictures. And then the general understanding is that when these hit the school systems, they don't change. There's second assumption of learning dreams is that community and family-centered learning is the proper way to understand how learning works, and that makes it, you can more effectively intervene in the system. This is arguing, in my mind, that the home, the community, in fact, are at the heart of learning. They really are. If you think back on the astronomy days, I wonder, do we all remember third grade where we were taught that in the ancient days, oh, those foolish ancient people believed that the sun went around the earth. The sun went around the earth, the Ptolemaic system of astronomy, and then toward the end they kind of realized, after almost 2,000 years, by the way, they began thinking, this system might not be the right one, and they did all kinds of weird tricks with the orbits, and then they finally just said, hey, maybe the sun's in the center, and it kind of solved a lot of their issues. So as an image, a metaphor, I think that we're in the school-centered model of learning, and it's incorrect. It's very similar to the Ptolemaic theory of astronomy, and that we've got the families and the communities orbiting around the schools, and the schools are of course important, but to understand in fact how it really functions, you need to have the real word generators and the vocabulary generators and all that, the people who create the attitudes and the deep loves of learning. That's the heart of it, and the schools are very important, but they orbit around the family and the community. This is the reality of how the learning system really functions. Schools matter, they're part of a connective weave, but that it's just as reasonable when you're intervening, and you can get many more resources and possibilities if you use the rest of this world out here to think about what learning means to people, all people. Paul Baran was a communications expert in the early 60s in our country, and apparently he was asked by the United States government to help them think through the dangers of an attack on our homeland by the Ruskies. A nuclear attack was worrying people. Some of us oldsters actually remember. And so there was a particular fear that the communication system of our country was going to fail, and he presented something very similar to this at a top secret meeting and said that thing over there with the one hub and all the nodes was what the communication systems was, and you could create failure in that system very easy by dropping a big nuke right in the middle of it, and that was a proper thing to worry about. You could go to the multi-hubbed, there's a bunch of hubs system. He argued that that was also susceptible to failure in that system, and then drew some image like this and said this is what a communication system had to be. And the reason one of the reasons this would not be susceptible to failure was that every node was multiply linked up, and so no matter what you cut or destroyed, there's still connectivity. That one over there is the school-centered system. It's one hub, there's one way to succeed at learning, you got to do it in the building, and we all know how easy it is to create failure in the system. This is about how the failure in systems get created. That's what this guy is arguing. And there's a million ways that we all can define about how a node or a family or a kid can get cut off from doing well in the school, whether they don't speak the language, or the teachers, there's something wrong with the way they're treated, or they didn't sleep, they're hungry, on and on and on and on. That he's right. There's a systems analysis that causes a lot of failure. All right, so this is actually what we got, the one in the middle. We don't just have one hub anymore. Kids can go to church, they can go to camps, they can go to parks. There's all kinds of other places that kids can participate in, and that's more of an understanding of, I think, where we're at. And the system I just described, the numbers I've just described, actually apply to this system. That even with this system, there's still an enormous number of young people that are not doing well. And then this thing over here, that's what we're trying to do. By asking someone what their dream is, it can lead, they want to, go to a music camp, or they want to learn how to open a business. I mean, the dreams are numerous, they're diverse, and they lead out into the community often. There are still schools, this system's got hubs, but Baran, the other thing he said about, in these first two, all the energy is directed into the hub. The motion of those two systems goes like this, and in the third one he argued that for this to work, the hubs had to be involved in out and horizontal movement through the community. And so the direction in this one is totally different. So this could be just called a community. I think it could be called a community. In Learning Dreams, we don't ask people to come. We go out and meet people wherever they feel like meeting you. I mean, so we're out. We're moving around this way and this way and this way. And then if their dream connects them to an employment center or wherever it goes, or the community college or the libraries or some other tutor or some individual with a weird skill that's willing to work with them, like that. So we're going around like this. And we also, we're also connected and working with schools. But so I began thinking of this as an image of what we're trying to do, and it worked for me because we're trying to make success in the system. We're trying to create a system in which it's hard to fail. That's another way to think about it. All the systems in the nodes in all of these three models are exactly the same. And so the argument is the only thing that's different is kind of what you can't see. It's it's not just relationships, it's connectivity, it's pathways, it's the comfortability with being able to move outside your own professional organization and connect in different ways, but that it's very hard to see that, but it's really important. I learned that in businesses, there's a couple different, I got this one's called the problem of the last mile, and this one's called the problem of the last inch, but I learned that in businesses, if you're building a system, like a electronic system or an internet system or any kind of system, doesn't matter what you have in the system, if when it reaches the user, the last mile or the last inch, when it reaches the user, it has to connect. It has to connect, or your entire investment is wasted. So, and the reason I'm using the garages, just another way to think about the garages here. The garages are kind of interesting. I think that one's out in the country, the one with the trees, and that's a suburban townhouse. This is some beat up city alley. But look, they're all paved right up to the garage door. All you got to do is jump in your car and drive off. The road system has solved the problem of the last mile and the last inch. It comes right to you, and that's why it works. I believe, and I'm arguing, that the school system and the education system, the superhighways of our learning system have no roads. They don't worry about the last inch or mile. They don't even think necessarily that's a responsibility of theirs. We are supposed to, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we're supposed to get these kids at the age of 5 dropped off at the door somehow, ready to roll. And there's no sense that there's a responsibility of the learning system to be linked this fully. Hasn't taken it on as a formal challenge yet. And so that's another way I sometimes think about Learning Dreams, because we're moving out. If there's people in our first project, the families we had, they demonstrated the way the schools measured 100% parent involvement, and I started getting calls about, oh, can you help? How do you do that? How do you get them in? How do you get them all in? And the get them in phrase is the way to define failure when it comes to parent involvement. Parent involvement, which correlates really well with school success, currently means parent involvement in helping their kids learn. So it means, and you do the key things are, we all know what they are. You get them up on time, and you give them breakfast, and you make them sure they arrive at school, and maybe no matter how humble your place is, you have a little quiet place somewhere, a desk with tools for homework. It's all really important stuff. And in some ideal world, you show up as a volunteer at school, at something, and you go to the parent conference. But it's parent involvement in their kids' learning. So we've changed the definition of parent involvement to mean parent involvement in the culture of learning itself as a curious human who believes they can follow their real aspirations as they define them. And my thought is that take it as a hypothesis, if you want, that if you get that kind of involvement, you're going to get the other kind of involvement. It's a consequence of this deeper sense of what involvement means. And that kind of involvement, in a weird way, is easier to get. If you're willing to go out and talk to people and find them and kind of in a fairly supportive way, see if they need some support in moving forward in their learning. I also believe, by the way, that this kind of thing is just what any one of us got who's doing okay in the learning system. We got someone giving us some support, and if we got someone nagging us now and then to go get that application in, I mean, it's not really a program. It's not some weird medical concept we do for people that are damaged. It's what we all got as humans to succeed at learning. Someone giving us some support and some backing, and when you wanted something, they go, yeah, you can do that, and oh yeah, we'll find, maybe we need some money, let's see what we can talk to, and maybe there's a scholarship to be found. It's normal human interactive support that learners who succeed need and have always needed, and that's all it is. Now, one of the big issues is, how do you do the work? Who does it? Okay, even if you're, yeah, interesting theory, like the idea that you're peeling into people's deepest dreams, I kind of get that, and okay, I'll even buy all this network stuff, but how do you do it? Who does it? And how do you train people to do it? When I first started doing this, people that liked what I was doing but didn't believe it had legs, one of their objections was that I created a model that worked for me. That I could, and I didn't believe that, by the way, but that was one way to reject the idea that this was a good way to think. Because how do I'm out knocking on doors, and it sounds a little strange. So I just needed to start looking into that and creating trainings for how to do it. But also, one thing I did was I sent an email, it's about maybe in the year 2000, would anybody out there in the state of Minnesota please nominate anyone they consider to be a master community builder? I just made that phrase up. I didn't define it. And I was just curious to see, what happened. Because I had a feeling this was about the time people were telling me what I was doing didn't have legs. And I'm thinking, I bet there's people doing this all over the state in all kinds of ways, in different walks of life. So I sent this email out. And of course, most of people just ignored me. And I got a couple of angry, who are you and why are you emailing me? But I got 50 people, just 50 answers that nominated people. And they were, everywhere, all different counties, different jobs. They were people with different colors and incomes and ages and everything. And so I spent the next summer, not all of it, I had to still get a few bits of work done here in town, but I kind of was sneaking out all over the state, and I call these people up to say, hi, can I come interview you? You've been nominated as a master community builder. And people would say, what? Why? Why? Can you tell me why? And I always say, no, I can't, but after I've interviewed you, talked to you for 2 hours, I'm sure I'll be able to tell you why. I'm 100% sure of it. And that was a little too intriguing for people to resist. They're like, okay, if you want to drive up. So anyway, it was a blast. It was a really good summer. Many of these people had to hide how they worked from their supervisors for the first 10 years of their professions because they weren't supposed to leave their desks or their offices until they were so good and they got so much acclaim in their communities, their supervisors no longer could control them because it would mean they got rid of that guy, everyone knew the whole program would cave in. And these people were still upset about it. They had resentment about the early parts of their careers because they had to kind of sneak around doing community work while they did their jobs really well. And they all believed they could. I talked to them about, well, how would you do it now? They felt like if some young person was interested, just send them up for a summer, and they just take them around and be kind of an apprenticeship model. This is what I said. They were pragmatic. They were not doing this out of ideology. These guys had not read the latest network science stuff and were out to turn the hubs into, new astronomical visions or anything like that. They were doing this because it worked. They were pragmatic. They were willing to share power. They were very flexible with respect to curriculum. If you sent these guys a training curriculum for anything, they would just start taking it apart. Well, I don't think my group would like it that way. I don't think the people want to hear quite like that. I remember once 8 years ago we did something different. They just never did anything the way they were told to exactly. But they were really good at going to actually talk in the system. They would go meet people. They understood they had to be diplomats and politicians within their systems. A couple more. This is, I bet if I didn't show you these slides and you had to invent what a community builder was, you probably could have come up with 95% of this. See community building and commitment to diversity as indistinguishable. They're not afraid to be controversial if they have to. They aren't dying to be controversial. These are not like just kind of rebel, stick it in your eye type people, but they will be controversial if they have to. And there were a lot of people that were doing this were youth people, and they were, see the last one down here, see community building as creating a frame for understanding youth and developing youth programming that's creative, positive, and resourceful. They thought it was that even if they ran programs, they felt to see youth development in the context of the community instead of their program was the right way to work. They saw their program as secondary to the kids growing up in their community, and which is really kind of cool. Have worked on their own without support from the system. Oh, this is what I said. They believe that organizations can and should learn how to support community builders, and they have ideas for how to support community builders, including them being trainers, mentors, and apprentices. So that was kind of great. It was really neat to find this cadre of people, and that was just random in response to one email. And so I'm convinced this is a real way to be. One of the issues is not that can we or could you become a master community builder, like this is, you know, the way the blood flows through your veins now, but could you pick up a couple of skills? Could you, can you modify some of what you do if you want? Some of you probably already are in various ways, do this kind of work. And so one of the issues of Learning Dreams is if you're going to take it on, you can't do it in your office. If you choose even to experiment with it, with 2 or 3 young people or something like that, you're going to have to be willing to go out and find them and talk to them, and maybe if their learning dream isn't school-based, and it won't be, you can almost bet on that, you have to be willing to kind of like move around a little bit. And so, and you don't have to become, you know, the next Bobby Kennedy or Martin Luther King, but you have to be willing to experiment with who you are somewhat. So that's something to think about. So I just began looking around. This is a big issue. So I found Lisbeth Shore's book's Common Purpose. That came out over 10 years ago now. She began using this phrase, new practitioners. I actually don't think they're new. The settlement house, I've been calling the settlement house women, even though there were some men in the settlement house movement. They knew all this stuff cold. They knew how to do this. They were great at it. If you read, I mean, almost everything I learned that helped me set this part of Learning Dreams up. I had done my PhD on the educator John Dewey, who had his Dewey Experimental School in Chicago at the end of the 1800s, and he was very close allies with the great Jane Addams, who established Hull House, Settlement House in Chicago. And because of doing a PhD in Dewey, I got absorbed in Jane Addams for a chapter, and it completely revolutionized my own way of understanding community work. So I'm glad Lisbeth Shore has this book out, and she's gone out and looked at some of the most interesting social activities in the United States, and claims people, and they're just like the community, my master community builders. They're collaborative, they don't need to know exactly what they're doing, they know how to establish trust, they're very pragmatic. They push the boundaries of their job descriptions. That's huge. And then she came up, she came up with that there are people who want to welcome the notion of spirituality in some way into how they work as well. So I'm really glad that there's interesting people writing about this. So, and so this is, again, this is an invitation to you guys to think about maybe, you know, if you take on Learning Dreams, but it's not new. The settlement house workers mastered this stuff a long time ago. And I suspect good ministers and church parish priests and all that are doing this kind of stuff too. In the actual project, we get referrals, and the key thing about how we work is that there has to be some academic type learning issue with a person. That's the kickoff. But that's like almost includes everybody nowadays. That means you know, there's an attendance problem, or there's a test score problem, or the parents aren't showing up at school. The things that go into doing well in school outcomes, something isn't working in that manner. And some of the ways, sometimes school social workers who believe in what we're doing will suggest kids and their families. We meet with teaching staffs, and sometimes teachers will say, I think a couple of my families would love that. But if you're the other thing we do is, if you really do the community work and you're walking around, that means you know youth workers and church people, and it's very easy, and people know their neighborhoods. It's very easy to get people to suggest families that might want to be in it. When I first did it, I always still think that part of our problem is that I think being a professional is good. We have things that we can offer that are valuable, but that, and this is just my own way of thinking about it, too often if we bureaucratize ourselves, it becomes very hard to work with families that are already struggling with success and how to connect to schools and learning. And so I wanted to get it right from the beginning. So in the original program when I did it, we didn't contact anybody unless a friend of theirs said they thought they'd be interested in it. Now that may seem like a funny thing to do, but it wasn't. And it's actually not that hard to, so for example, I might, like if I was knocking on Don's door and he opens his door, and you can imagine this could also be in public housing projects or something like that. I'm like this white guy with a beard running around, and the door open like that, and I'll say something like, I was talking to your wife, Arvan, and I was telling her about this new thing we're doing, and she thinks you'd be interested in hearing about it. Now and I think I can tell you about it in a minute. That's actually an honest way to meet somebody. This may seem like a small thing. That's a very honest way to meet somebody. That means the first meeting is not, your kid's growing up and we're here to help you, or some version of that. It's a human that he trusts, says I should talk to him, and that'll buy me an honest minute at the door, not much more than that, human to human. That matters. That matters. And in that minute, we were able to say, we got this program going in the neighborhood, and it's volunteer, it's kind of upbeat, we think, but we're just finding if people want to participate in learning in some way, if maybe you have a learning dream that's dead-ended or you want to work on, then we're not rolling in money, but we're pretty sure we can help you troubleshoot it. That's it. You can say that in a minute. From the point of view of learning dreams, the argument is a pre-planned curriculum where you're going to know what you're going to teach someone to get them back on some kind of path is by definition a plan that's not going to get at their own personal dream, because it's going to be unique and it won't fit into a pre-planned curriculum. We all know it. They're not telling you anything you haven't heard, but it's really important to remember it. I had done community organizing in the past. In community organizing, you're really out there. There's some issue that's driving people up the wall. The lead paint in the housing is poisoning the kids. Things that really, really, really anger people, and you want change to happen, and you organize the neighborhood, and then somehow somebody opposes you, some other group of people doesn't want to spend the money on that. It's very intense arguments over how to make the world more just. In doing educational advocacy in a community, you do not get opposition. It's really fascinating. You get a lot of people that don't want it, they got better things to do in their mind than help you out. But if no one will jump up and say, at least I have not experienced it, that woman will not get her GED. No one does that. People might blow you off, but they do not say that. And that might seem kind of uninteresting, but it's actually quite valuable and fascinating, because it means people aren't threatened by this, and so they don't oppose it. And as a result of that, there's a very kind of gentle power that emerges out of this over time. You really can start getting stuff done in ways that are surprising. And I didn't expect that to be the case. It was kind of a wonderful discovery. It's a different way to pull people together. The years I did it, 2 people said no. They were both women who started crying and they said they couldn't imagine doing anything for themselves. But maybe could I come back in a year? And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people in different ways said yes. People were suspicious, as they should have been, and they wanted to know what the catch was. They really believed it was an academic thing, that we were going to get them in and do it to them, and we weren't. And then the only catch was, after they were making progress in any way they defined it, we would also talk with them about how to support the learning of their kids, which of course everyone loved, of course. If that's the only catch, that means families are on board. And I think I mentioned earlier, and this was a key part. Now, some people, in fact, many people hadn't thought like this for a long time, and they wanted to talk, but they didn't want to admit they didn't have a learning dream. We got a really nice way of talking with people about what they love to do as children, what do they do for fun now, and just kind of go, oh, where have they ever been in the world that kind of turned them on as a human. You just talk to them, and it always leads to a light going on in some way that excites them from their own vision. If someone says, I want to go back to school, I went to community education, went to community college one semester 20 years ago, I want to go back, I train my people to believe that the families are probably thinking we want them to say they want to go back to school, that's an expectation that we're kind of putting on them without even trying to. And so we go out of our way to make sure that they understand there's many options. That's a fine thing, but let's keep talking for a while and go into the many examples of the kind of dreams people have, which are sometimes very concrete. I want to get my driver's license. I've been stuck in the house for 20 years, and it's a big deal. I want to, learn to speak English. I want to become a citizen. Most of the people we work with are women, but not all of them. There's a fair number of men over the years. A lot of the men wanted to use the learning as a retraining tool to get can you help me find a new job? Can I learn how to be a carpenter? Can I learn this? Can I learn that? Some people, the word dream, we might, I want to be an artist. We've had that. I want to go back to become a doctor. When we talk with kids, the younger the kids are, the more it's a conversation with us and the parents. The older, and by the time you get into high school and up there, they're young adults anyway, and you talk with them on their own terms. So that conversation happens. We're going to look more into that and how we respond, this kind of tools we use to begin thinking about how to respond to people's dreams. When someone tells you their dream, like if say you're a parent or you're an aunt or something like that, and and your kid or your nephew or niece tells you, you're just talking to them, and they tell you a dream, you kind of have a tendency to think, oh, I know such and such, or what about the West Bank School of Music, or you just kind of start kicking in with possibilities, which may be kind of great. But we discipline ourselves seriously, and so if someone has a dream, we write it in the middle of the dream map, like something like Shukri wants to learn English. And the reason we do that is then you make what these lines represent, and we train ourselves to think like this. It's very simple, it's very powerful, it's very useful. We start filling in possible connections, possible community connections, or resources that may be useful to this thing. So you start filling in possible things, places you could go. There might be a tutoring, there might be a location, there might be a community center, maybe there's an older sister. There's, and when you've been at it for a while, you know people in the community. So, but the interesting thing is this. When you map out, we have all these different maps that drive and make the work very concrete and helpful. When you map out the possibilities in the community, the cool thing about this is you're always not exactly right. And the way you find that out, and this is why this ends up being a powerful tool, is you have to then check with people. And by doing the map, by the way, 2 or 3 of the thoughts you had when you immediately heard about the dream that popped in your mind, they're likely to be on the map too. But you always force yourself to come up with 3 or 4 or 5 more, and you always come up with some things that almost always end up being better than your first thoughts. Because then what you start doing, this again is rocket science 2A, you actually check in with people. You call them up, you visit them, you talk to them, and you say, what about someone who wants to learn English? What about those classes you used to offer? I got this term I've developed, doorpost democracy, because if you just kind of go lean on their doorpost and you say, I'm with Learning Dreams, you may even know them already because you met them before, and you're advocating for a particular thing, and the people who you talk to will redirect you. They're actually in the community, and they will redirect you, and they'll tell you, oh, you need to talk to this person. Oh yeah, you're going over to the plaza, great, but do you know you got to talk to that person? And what happens is you begin getting very quickly, and I think, you know, we were talking about 6 degrees of separation. In communities where people aren't that far from each other, usually in 3 doorposts, you begin knowing, you are really into the heart of what's happening in your community around any particular issue. You don't need to know stuff before you start. Someone was saying about the I don't know answer. That's always the right answer when we start these issues. If someone says, do you know how to help me learn English? The proper answer is, well, no, I don't. And the reason you're going to is not because you were such geniuses at anything. It's because the process of talking with people in the community quickly brings in the other people in the community that they know, because they're out there, need to be connected to it. And so you're actually building a community coalition in a funny way around the issue of this person's learning dream. Then we have a second map we call the obstacle map. Now this one is particularly complicated. I'm particularly planning to make this one copyrighted and make money off it. It looks like this. Very similar to the dream map. And so, you know, so you write the person's the same thing, you know. You keep your focus on what's going on in the middle. But then the obstacles, and you got them. Because the obstacles, you know, like it can be transportation or childcare and on and on and on. The specifics always comes down to the real thing you're working on. And then the obstacles themselves can become subject of a map. If an obstacle that really is in the way is transportation, then you can write in here. And then you begin treating that and you just write them in, bus, you know, taxi, you go around. And it may sound tedious, but it's a really concrete, very specific way to really quickly get at the people in the place around the person you're working with. Sometimes it's a connecting issue. It's more like you're the cab driver. There's a guy that did want to go to community college, and he was really poor. I was convinced community college would pay for this guy and give him a scholarship. And you go ask community college, and they say, yeah, we want to support that guy. All he's got to do is come down. And you talk to the guy, and you tell him that, and he won't go down because he's afraid of going down. And then you talk to the community college, and you say, the guy wants to go to community college. He loves this particular program. Can you come sign him up out at his house? No, we don't do that. That's the problem of the last mile. But there's no one being mean about it. It's like ready to happen and unable to happen. And that's where we kind of provide this connection. In the case of that particular guy, you know, you finally say to the community college guy, well, do you come out and do presentations like at community centers and park houses? Oh, sure, we do that. Well, this guy lived 30 feet from a park house. And so the community college, we set up a table, the community college guy drove out, put out his stuff, and then we walked our guy over, and he got a scholarship and he went to community college. But without us kind of messing with the wires of the system, that wouldn't have happened. A lot of it works at that level. It's simply that the learning system really isn't geared to kind of, people are just expected to have this kind of certain kind of initiative, which, you know, a lot of people have, but many people haven't. It's just it's a skill, really. Anyway, so we have a lot of stories and how to get good at thinking like that. We train people to do that. Another kind of example that's a little more complicated would be, like one guy wanted to learn English. He worked at the Swift plant. I don't know if you've been to Worthington. They had one English class at 4 in the afternoon. That was when he worked. And so the neighborhood educator calls me up and says, you know, okay, what do I do? So I said, well, just start imagining things, you know. So just start laying it out. You could find him a tutor. You could drive him to another town. We just kind of started making stuff up. And then, well, what does community ed want to start a class in the evening? So she went to community ed, and they wanted 8 people. They would be happy to start a class if they had 8 people. And she called the plant manager and said, can you put out a notice and see if anyone else wants to learn English? So by the next day, we had 12 people, and by next week, the class was up and running. And it was only we had one dad in it, But there were 11 other people, all from the same neighborhood, who were now in this class. We didn't know, one of the interesting things about Learning Dreams is it has very large spin-off effects. You get many people involved in learning that aren't even in Learning Dreams families often, because some of the issues aren't solvable without actually having to create a new thing. Many are, but some aren't. And then that just zooms people in. And we've learned after about 2 years, there's more people in our efforts learning that aren't even our families, because you really do start affecting the learning possibilities in the community over time. It takes time to do that. In the original project, we did it for 3 years, like I said, and they concluded that this was not a formal research project. This was a community-based learning action. Just straightforward stuff. The parents participated. The local institutions responded. The big thing that got people interested was that there was zero truancy in our families, and parents were all involved, and the test scores went up some, but it wasn't a formal research and evaluation study. And it just all it did was warrant a lot of interest and more funds to start digging into this thing more effectively. And then on this, I'm going to say something about local institutional responsiveness. There's many examples of this. This comes from being in a place long enough over time. So for example, we're in public housing in Minneapolis, and there's a unit of housing where the pipes are busted, and so no one's living in it because it's not being used as a place to live because you can't live in it. So we asked public housing, I sent them a one-page letter asking for a classroom, just a place to meet, so we could just do all kinds of stuff, because we were working with a lot of families. It'd be really useful. And I got a really kind of unpleasant letter back saying, you know, we're a federal program that provides housing for people that can't afford it. It's an extremely important public good, and we're not going to use it for classrooms, buddy. You know? And I'm like, fine, I believe in public housing too, but no one's living in that one, you know? Just until you get the pipes fixed. And there was like no response to that. Okay, but we're there. We're in the neighborhood. We're still working. We're not like coming in and going out because of the years thing. The years thing matter. And about 8 months later, I get an envelope at my house, a thick envelope, and it's from the feds. And if you're an American citizen and you get a thick envelope from the feds, you get nervous, you know? They caught some tax return, or there was a camera running when you were 18 you didn't know about, and someone just viewed that thing, you know? You don't like it. So I'm like looking in this thing, and it looks like a contract. It's a huge federal contract, and it keeps talking about according to as described in Memo A. Memo A. So finally I think, what's Memo A? Memo A was the one-page letter I'd written to these guys 8 months ago saying, can we use your space? And what happened was, there's like, you know, the feds send out evaluators to all their public housing on a constant basis over a number of years. And these guys got visited, and they were told, you don't have enough stuff going on here for your residents. And they just said, oh, we're working with a guy at the university, you know? And they did, and they dished up this contract, and it showed up. And things like that happen actually a lot. This is a thing that also I didn't know that I would learn. People in institutions like ourselves are fine people. And if they don't respond quickly, it's because, you know, there's other things going on. They don't exactly get what you're talking about, or they just have other, you know, other demands. But if you're around this kind of way of doing work, they come around. It was really kind of amazing. We had all kinds of places that said no, no, no. And then over the course of the next couple of years, all of a sudden you get the phone call, you know, we were thinking. All of a sudden, little by little by little, you begin, that's how the network thing begins building over time. All right, so I was just looking at lessons learned. I think I mentioned the new local educator model we've been talking about. That's the person who's out and about. The two-way partnership on learning. That's just another way of saying this is another one of my ideologies, that the partnership between the families and schools isn't a partnership. It's really a way to mobilize the community to help the school get its learning tasks done, which are valuable, but that we believe that if the institutions, not just schools, if the institutions could say to people, young adults, older adults, we're interested also in your learning needs. We don't want you just to be interested in what we do. What do you do? What families do, the learning agenda of the home is to be curious and to love to learn and to believe you can learn what you want to learn. And we thought if the schools and institutions showed the families that mattered to them as much as we want the learning agenda of the institutions to matter to the families. We expect the families to really kick in. And we thought if we showed that we could kick in for their learning agenda, over time it would entirely change the relationship between people and the school. One image, forget all the theory, forget everything. One way of thinking about this is that moment when the teacher says to a parent, your kid is failing, your kid is screwing up, your kid's doing terrible. That kind of horrible moment in American society that happens all too often. But if you think about it, it should be possible for one adult to tell another adult about the problems of one of their kids if they know about them. That should actually be able to happen. That's, and so how far back would you have to unroll the reel? Like unwrite history, how far back would you have to go till you restarted it with different behaviors? And when you got back up to it, a school person said to a parent something like, your kid's struggling in math, and the parent says, oh, thanks, John, what else? And they talk about other things. That you actually had a friendly relationship. And so I thought one way to solve learning games kind of matches that test, because we're out in the neighborhood, we get to know people like friends, we support their learning needs and they really believe it, and then over time, if you see them and you talk to them, you can talk to them about their kids or young people or older in a real honest way, because the way humans ought to be able to talk to each other. So that goes back to this, you're a professional, but you've de-bureaucratized the deal. And so people will allow you to talk to them the way they want you to talk to them. It's a very powerful thing. I think I've done the place and time and the education organizing. The adaptable to diverse cultures is, on one hand, it's simple because people are telling you what they want, and so they can want anything they want. And if their desire or vision or dream comes out of their cultural setting, it just does. And so in that sense, it's easily adaptable to people from any point of view. I suppose if there was some culture of people that weren't curious, then it wouldn't be adaptable. But I don't think that culture exists. The heart of learning is this story about this feeling a person has when they're in that moment of growth or change or moving ahead in a way that feels right to them. That the story is at the heart of it. And educators and professionals often divide learning in ways like public or private or formal or informal. There's a whole series of ways at the university we think about learning. People who are in their learning story they couldn't care less how their learning is organized. It's that it generates the response, it's an opportunity for them to be more of who they are in some way. And so with that kind of, we all know that really. That again is not some new learning. It was more like, oh yeah, we all knew that once. So to kind of reimagine what learning really was about, get the essence of it in our hearts, we went back out 2 summers ago and interviewed many people about how they learn. And the question we asked that was the strike gold question was, if we painted yellow paint on the bottom of your shoes and watched you walk around for 3 or 4 weeks, tell us where you go that makes you feel like you're growing and becoming who you want to become. And we got a remarkable number of stories in response to that question. Many of the places where people felt like they were thriving had nothing to do with programs that anyone offers. They weren't in schools. They were on riverbanks. They were on walks. They were in informal gatherings with friends. The question then could be, if we could actually make short videos that weren't about the learning, but actually transmitted the feeling of the magic of the learning, then we could, one, honor our people, honor the kids, honor the parents in a way. It would be we thought they'd like to have the video made. 2, we believed if the video was on the site, they would begin bringing their friends and their parents and their kids to see it. It would the pleasure of the honor would overcome the obstacle to the site, and we could help with that in cases if we needed to provide cheap equipment and things like that. We're coming to that. And then thirdly, The real idea about learning dreams is that it can inspire, even if you're not sure what you need, that it inspires you from within yourself, even when you yourself don't know ahead of time what's going to come out. The dream interview and all that, when that people go, yeah, that's what my learning dream is. If you could see enough really cool videos about different kinds of learning, could you have the thought, I could do that, or my kid might like that, that it would have the inspirational possibility.
We're really excited about the video project. We think it'll augment and strengthen our traditional approach to learning dreams. And as a way to wrap up the training today, I'd like to show you a couple of our videos.
One of our moms in North Miami wanted to write. She didn't know what she wanted to say or what her dream was. She didn't know. But it's a typical story kind of thing, though. It turned out she had under her bed a box of notebooks she'd been keeping since she was a little girl, and then ended up deciding she wanted to learn to write. So she's taking writing classes.
As I think back on 2007, I can't really think of much that I haven't lost. People sometimes admit to me that they don't know how I do it, and quite honestly, most of the time, I don't know how I do it, except by the grace of God. Before I could tackle the answers to the questions, what I've lost, what I found, and what I don't miss, I first had to ask myself, what do I have left? The answer, my children, my health, and a sound mind. Seems like such a small list, but very essential to me. As a shock, fear, and realization of all the things that transpired in 2007 finally began to wear off, I used those three things to keep a spark of hope alive within. I lost my husband in a physical death. I lost my mother in an emotional death. I lost my identity, security, and a lot of ignorance. I found the courage to face death. I found acceptance of the love that others had for me. I found some wisdom, the power to stand up for myself, and I'm beginning to discover my true self. I can't really say that I missed the journey here. Of course, there are times when I wonder if things had to happen the way that they did in order for me to get to this point in life. But that takes up too much energy. So I'd rather utilize that energy figuring out where to go from here and how to make the best of it. Because of the events of 2007, I am now keenly aware of, well, everything. I guess the most important thing to add to my found list is that I found life again. The spark of hope that I had has now ignited into a full-blown burning flame. A flame that is now burning to make my life really count for something great and positive. Now, if I only knew where to start.
Show you one for one of our kids. This is in fact just a girl who wanted to take the drawing class.
Well, this concludes the training for Learning Dreams. I hope you have a good feeling and understanding that cultural learning is really the foundation for school and educational success, and that family and community are at the heart of learning, and that with help from an educational advocate, what we call a neighborhood-based educator, that can be used to dramatically increase participation by people, even when these are families that are supposedly cut off and disconnected from the school system. I also hope you have an understanding that this advocacy, not only can it help people connect to the wider world of learning, but it can generate increased support for families from the institutions themselves when those institutions are willing to be more creative about how they learn to connect with people. It, after all, is a two-way street. Specifically, I hope you have a feeling for Learning Dreams itself as a program that works with real people in homes and communities to increase learning based on their dreams. That's what we care about. And also for our new developments that we hope will create online support for learning and reach even more people than ever before, and which in no way we think will give up on our vision of working with the families most cut off from learning. If you're interested in finding out more about our approach to education and learning and how it might apply to your work, or maybe you'd like to volunteer to participate in Learning Dreams with us, please feel free to contact me at my email, Stein, Stein 035 @umn.edu. You can also learn more about Learning Dreams at our website, which is learningdreams.org. We have extensive trainings available including detailed training for people who want to work with the families using the Learning Dreams approach. But we also have more general trainings for people who might simply want to understand community building in creative and active ways. Thank you very much.